The fact is that petrol will still cost you over 20 Rand per litre, as I was saying. And let's look at this graph. This looks at inland petrol, 93 unleaded. And remember that because of the travel cost, it is a little bit more expensive inland. So we started the year below 15 Rand for a litre of fuel, ending above 20 Rand. And right now we're at 20.07. So the increase equating to nearly 40% for the year, basically, which is very significant. Let's bring in our economics editor, Tshepo Mongoai, now. Tshepo, firstly, I mean, an almost 40% increase over a year, that is very significant for consumers.
It's quite a big jump, Francis, over 5 Rand since the beginning of this year. It creates a lot of pressure for many households. Many small businesses are going to struggle. Small businesses that in the manufacturing input costs, farmers' input costs are already starting to be a major concern for most businesses. So obviously we know in terms of inflation, the Reserve Bank has made some projections averaging around 4% going forward. But it's a concern that we're not only talking about the internal issues, there are global constraints, supply constraints that we are starting to see that are also putting more fuel to this inflationary pressure that we are seeing.
So economic pressures, we know, sometimes even become political pressures in South Africa.
Well, following after the July unrest, there are anything is possible, Francis. There are concerns that perhaps some people, when they start becoming under pressure, we're talking about people who don't have the luxury of space in terms of dealing with these price pressures. If people can't get to work because they're spending more on fuel or on transport, then what do they do next? It's a big question. Businesses that don't have the luxury of all other costs, because the margins that they operate in with, they are very thin. For example, taxi owners, the margins there's not much, there's no room to maneuver. So when people start feeling those kind of pressure, they're in business, they're working hard, but they've nothing to take home. There's a concern.
So you mentioned inflationary pressures, and we hear this concern every now and then in South Africa and the world, in fact, stagflation, where you have an economy that's not kicking into gear or not growing, and then you have price increases like this and overall inflation hikes, and we've even had an interest rate hike in South Africa. Is this a big concern?
Well, fortunately, if you look at the first quarter, second quarter, we already have an understanding, an idea of what's likely to happen in terms of growth. So we're going to see some growth. Third quarter, there are concerns that perhaps we could see a contraction. So based on those quarters, chances are we are still going to record the projected growth of around 5%. It might be slower, marginally below that 5%, but generally we are still going to see growth coming through if things stay more or less as they are. There is no the close of the economy, but from the previous quarters, things are looking better, and then probably we will see growth.
So sure, at least some growth, but the hopes around the festive season, I mean, affected because of the border closures. So we'll have to see if that tourism industry, how hard it hits, I guess, and how long how protracted that is.
No doubt, the last quarter is going to be one to look very closely to see what's likely to happen, but the impact is definitely going to be seen in many sectors. Well, confidence also it becomes everything, because you need to get the confidence going, especially during the festive season when people are celebrating, they spend more.
Tshepo, very quickly, looking at this graph, and Outer, for instance, has looked over the last 10 years, saying that the actual fuel price, the price of imported oil, and of course it depends on the currency, has changed by about 50%, but the bigger increases are in levies, and there's always gripes about the levies and the road the road accident fund, rather, and other things that government charges for. Are they justified?
Well, they generate a lot of money for the fiscus. I mean, general fuel levy generates about 80 billion rand annually.
Sure.
So that's a lot of money that the fiscus is relying on this. Yes, there are concerns, and I'm sure government is looking at this very closely, that this is creating a lot of price pressure. But there's very room to maneuver in terms of dealing with the current money that we generate from this other costs. I mean, there are about 4 levies and taxes that are part of the petrol price, and all of them really generate a lot of money for the fiscus, and they will continue generating it. If you cut them away, there's going to be serious problems, as already there are problems in terms of our revenue. So I don't see any changes or government adjusting that.
So no cuts, but maybe government will think about the impact of the increases, given what we're seeing here. Thank you very much, economics editor here at SABC News, Tshepo Mongoai.